All right, we did make it to the end, and I appreciate everyone staying through. As Sean said, I've been around AD a while. Actually, I need to update the bio. I just got my 21st MVP in July, which was quite a milestone in itself. And I was telling someone at dinner last night, I should have 23, but the process of actually going through the MVP process is quite rigorous, and I was traveling at the time, and twice I just didn't have time to fill out the forms. It takes about 8 hours to fill out everything that I do throughout the year. So anyway, it's great to be here. As Sean also mentioned, I have moved on to GuidePoint Security, and GuidePoint really hired me to do all of their on-prem AD security stuff. Come to find out, we're doing more than just security. We're doing consolidations, migrations. We're helping with PowerShell creations to automate things, and a ton of different things around on-prem AD. Things are just blossoming, and I'm seeing this resurrection of on-prem Active Directory interest, which is great because on-prem AD especially has been kind of orphaned and left alone, and we need to get back into on-prem AD and secure it. Plus we need to do it with Entra, because Entra certainly isn't secure by default. So we really need to look at both environments. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to uncover some different concepts around what I'm seeing in my assessments, what I'm seeing that organizations are bypassing. Hopefully I'm going to give you a list of action items that I'm going to suggest that you do when you get back to go in and dig through your Active Directory environment, looking for certain configurations that are highly exploitable. Also, I'll go through some tools and some things that I use to help expedite the process of doing assessments. We'll dive into PowerShell a little bit and go through those things. So what we're going to look at is the typical attack tactics. This is important because of where we are today with our knowledge of Active Directory, with our knowledge of Entra, in terms of, do we know everything about what we need to secure? Then we'll go and talk a little bit about on-prem Active Directory. We'll touch on Entra ID, and then we'll kind of go through in a summary about the assessments that I go through and what you should actually be going through as well. So if this looks familiar to you in terms of kind of the attack path that an attacker takes, it's pretty common, right? So the attacker is going to target a system, an application, a service, whatever they do. They're going to use some exploit, right? Phishing or some other mechanism to exploit the user to get information. There's an entry point, and then there is local privilege escalation. Usually when people look at this chain that an attacker takes, they leave out this critical step of local privilege escalation. And so I always hammer this piece. Local privilege escalation is critical for the attacker for two reasons. One, they typically need to install some tool to help them do recon on the environment. Two, in order for the attacker to mine the credentials from that machine, they need local privileges. So the attacker is looking for local privileges. They're looking for an organization where the administrators break tiering. That's why all of this is so important. So when I do an assessment, I always encourage that we look at endpoints, not just servers, also endpoints, because we need to dive into these areas to know what is happening on the endpoints. So a lot of times what I will suggest, and I'll throw out some tools to you throughout the day as well, is to use Bloodhound. Bloodhound is able to go to the endpoints, find out which accounts have actually logged in, they have credentials that are cached there, and then they backtrack that all the way back to AD. So that type of a tool is extremely important for this one piece, okay? And then of course, once they get local privileges, they do recon on the infrastructure, they move laterally, and then they gain privileges within Active Directory. What's also very interesting that I want to point out is there are security technologies that many organizations are throwing at this to say, this is going to secure our environment. This is going to secure our identities, okay? So if we look at specifically PAM and MFA, all right? These technologies, even with insurance companies, are being touted as you need to have this to secure your environment. These are going to secure your environment. But I don't want to burst your bubble. These technologies do not secure identities. They do not secure identities, all right? Let's first of all talk about MFA, right? Everyone's using MFA, but does MFA really secure the identity? Well, let's take an analogy, right? Many of you checked into a hotel a couple of days ago. And let's say that the hotel doesn't just accept your driver's license, they also require your passport. Multi-factor authentication. You're giving multiple factors to prove who you are. Does that change you at all? Does that secure you? Does that in any way change you that you gave them 2 forms of identification? Nope, it did not. Doesn't in technology either. Now, it helps secure some things, but it doesn't secure the actual identity. The identity doesn't change with MFA. If the identity is insecure, MFA doesn't change that fact, right? Let's talk about a PAM, right? Privilege access. So all a PAM does is it says this identity can have privileges over some aspect at a certain time. Actually, this is anti-security, right? Because it's giving privileges. So a PAM doesn't secure the identity either. Even though the identity might have no privileges, it could still be insecure. And a PAM doesn't change that. Now, what's great about the knowledge beyond this graph around Active Directory, we today know every single way that an attacker can get into Active Directory. As of today. Now, tomorrow there may be a new 0 day, there may be a new tactic, but today we know every single way that someone can get into Active Directory. Which means what? We know every way to secure it. We know exactly how to secure Active Directory. But what I'm seeing is we're not doing that. And it's not even saying, I know about that and I'm taking the risk. It's, I didn't know about that. So I'm going to encourage everyone to dig deeper with your Active Directory environment and try desperately to secure every possible way that an attacker can get in. And if you can't secure that, create monitoring, set up other guardrails to help monitor and control the risk of that configuration. Because we know every single way that an attacker can get in. All right, let's talk about some of those ways. This is a list that I always go to when talking about core Active Directory security. And when I go into an organization, I find most of these configurations are not secure. So let's talk about a couple of them and why they're so important. Privileged users with SPNs, right? Service principal names. As soon as you earmark an account to be a service account for a service, it automatically is provided an SPN. It's under the hood. It's just given an SPN, okay? Due to the nature of the way Kerberos works and the way that Microsoft implemented it, it is impossible to secure this configuration from someone attacking it and getting information to where now they can impersonate the account. It's impossible. That's why it says privileged users with SPNs. Because the idea is that we want to go in and find all accounts that have an SPN and remove their privileges if possible. Now, is that completely possible in every situation? No, because the account might have to have some privilege in order to perform its duty over that service. So what do we do in that case? What if we have an account that has privileges and has an SPN? How can we protect that account? Well, first of all, let's make sure it's a long, strong password. If we can go in and we can make configurations around that account, we can limit the attack surface for that account. So if I go into an environment, let's say here, where I have an account that has an SPN, what I can do with that account is I can come in here and I can configure this log on to. It's one of my favorite settings. It does two things. One, what we all hate, documentation, right? Because it's actually, you have to know which machines that service is running on so you can list them here. Because if you list the account here, that account can only log on to the computers that you list here. So you're taking the attack surface from, let's say, the size of a football field down to a postage stamp. That's a pretty impressive configuration, okay? And it's a service account. So it doesn't need to log on everywhere. It should only be logging on to the machines that are approved. Now, one of the other things that I'm seeing and have seen for years is organizations do not know today all of their service accounts. They don't know the service, they don't even know the service accounts, let alone where they're configured, okay? As an action item, put that on your list. We're coming up to the holidays. I always encourage admins around the holidays. You have some free time usually because people are on break and you're not. Try to start tracking down your service accounts. Now, in many of the organizations that I'm going into, because this is a heavy lift, I mean, I'm dealing with organizations, 50, 100,000 users, I'm using tools like Silverfort to help me. Okay, and I know that Simpress now has a new module for service accounts. Get something that is going to help you track your service accounts. You have to document them to know where they are and make sure that you're looking at them periodically so that they're not logging on somewhere they shouldn't be logging on. But this configuration here can help you with that. Right? We also can run simple queries to find out users that have SPNs. Let's see if I have that one here, right? So simple PowerShell queries can find users instantaneously that have SPNs, right? Utilize these concepts. It's super easy to do this. And even if you're just doing it to be aware, that's half the battle. We have to know which accounts can be compromised so that we can now take better action to secure them, okay? Unconstrained Kerberos delegations. Normally it's for computers, but it can be for a user, right? This also, impossible to secure. There's no way to secure a machine that has unconstrained Kerberos delegation. So again, what you need to do is look at it and say, hey, can I increase the security of the delegation, right? Can I go to Kerberos delegation? Can I go to resource-based controls? These are things that you can do to reduce the attack surface. Unfortunately, Kerberos has a lot of different issues with it, and it can be attacked, especially with these delegations at all 4 levels. But the risk is reduced as you get a more secure Kerberos delegation. Primary group ID. Some of you haven't even thought about primary group ID in 15 years, 20 years maybe. Primary group ID is important to know about because we haven't thought about it in 15, 20 years. And if I go into a configuration and look at my primary group ID, it kind of makes sense why, right? Down here it says There is no need to change the primary group unless you have MAX or POSIX compliant applications. Some of you probably don't even know what a POSIX compliant application is. Okay? But we haven't needed this setting in a long time. But as humans, as normal nature, this is what happened. In the early 2000s, 2003, we had a POSIX compliant application. So we had to go in and configure the primary group ID for this. In most cases, you had to set it to the domain admins, right? So you went in and configured the primary group ID to be domain admins. In 2008, you got rid of the POSIX compliant application. Did you go and remove the primary group ID? Nope, didn't even think about it. That was 4 years ago. So what I always check, which users still have a primary group ID that's a privileged account. Because as soon as you configure that, that account now has those privileges for whatever group you have set to be the primary group ID. So again, simple PowerShell commands. This one, I'm actually checking for any that doesn't have 513 set. 513 is the default. And 513 is related to what group? Domain users, right? So I want to know if someone has a primary group ID set to something else. Now, if you were to try to go in and configure the primary group ID for a group that the user isn't a member of right now, would it allow you to do that? No. So why am I talking about this? Well, there's something called a DC shadow attack, which bypasses this. This is a great way to set up persistence. Because if I'm the attacker and I do a DC shadow attack against an account that maybe should never have privileges, I can go and set the primary group ID to whatever group I want. It allows it, and now they can leverage that account to actually now get around the environment. And no one's even monitoring that account because it doesn't look like it has privileges. These are the types of persistence that we have to look for. These are the misconfigurations that I want to look for. And I want to take these things away because we no longer need them in most cases. SID history, right? Many of you have dealt with SID history, right? When you do a migration, right? So you put the SID for the source account into SID history on the target account so that the new user can gain access to the old resources during the migration. Do you know that you can actually set SID history for an account in the same domain? So I can set it for the built-in administrator. I can set it for any other account in the domain. How many of your SOC analysts or how many of your SIMs are actually looking for an account that now is configured with SID history? Because unless you're doing a migration, you would never think, I need to do that. But yet another perfect way that an attacker can create persistence and actually get around in the environment is once they have the ability, they can put SID history on any account. And now they can use that account to get around in the environment. And again, it can be for a single domain. It doesn't have to be multiple domains. It doesn't have to be a SID from a different domain. SID history is just a SID. But as soon as it's configured, that user immediately has that capability and can gain access to whatever that user can gain access to. Admin SD holder, right? Admin SD holder is a built-in object in every single Active Directory environment. Admin SD holder plays a role in what's called SD prop, security descriptor propagation. And the way that SD prop works is it is responsible for ensuring that every administrative account has the correct ACL. So every periodic time period, and you can change it, SD-prop runs. And it looks at all of the built-in accounts that have privileges and looks to see if the ACL matches admin SD holder. And if it doesn't match admin SD holder, whatever's on admin SD holder replaces that ACL. So if I'm an attacker, do I need to actually go after different accounts? Or do I just need to go after admin SD holder and it'll do the work for me? Now, looking at ACLs in Active Directory, not the funnest task, right? Because if I come in here and I go down to admin SD holder, I would actually have to look at the ACL in order to see who's on that list. This is a very difficult task, okay? So what I recommend and what I do is I actually use PowerShell to pull out the ACL for admin SD holder, okay? So I use DSACLs. So it's really not PowerShell, but so I use DSACLs to pull out the ACL for admin SD holder. The reason I do this is this tells me what is actually configured on the object. I don't have to sift through the ACL editor. I'm actually just looking at what is configured. And then I go up and I just look for anomalies in that particular list. Because a lot of these are just built-in basic administrators, pre-Windows 2000 enterprise admins. So I'm looking for entries that do not look like they belong and they stand out pretty clearly. Right there's help desk. I encourage you to do this, please, because you're going to be shocked at who's on that admin SD holder. The one configuration that I see probably more than anything is Exchange admins. And I always get the same comment, we haven't had Exchange in 10 years. So think about that. Now, if someone is added to a group that you don't even monitor because you got rid of that application, but that group is still in AD and that group is still listed on an ACL like admin SD holder, I can put myself in any group that's part of that group or in that group and no one's going to monitor it. And now I can get access to certain things because that isn't being monitored. These are the types of details that I encourage you to look at constantly throughout the year, looking for this drift. Shadow admins, very similar to admin SD holder, except for this is within your AD structure, right? And I find most organizations do not look at this. But I look at it from an AD security assessment. I even look at it from a normal just audit perspective. And I have been for years. I do the exact same thing with organizational units that I just did with admin SD holder running DSACLs. Now, many of you have a lot of OUs, right? How are you going to pick which OU to actually look at? Because you don't really need to look at all of them. My recommendation is to look at OUs that contain users and groups. Here's why. Most AD delegations boil down to two of the most common. First, reset password. So someone went in and they set up a group or a user to be able to reset password over an OU of users, usually help desk or some regional help desk or something like that. The second one, modifying group membership. Someone has granted, maybe a manager, all the managers can change group membership, or maybe application owners can change group membership. So what I do is I go through and I look particularly for these two settings across my OUs that contain users and groups. But I've also added a third one now. The other shadow admin that I look for is users that can create users or create computers. Why would I be looking for accounts that can create users and create computers? Everyone's heard about the SAM account name vulnerability. Anyone that can create an account can create an account that has the exact same name as a domain controller, and now that becomes a huge vulnerability. So I not only look inside of Active Directory delegation for that configuration, I also, on my domain controller, I usually run this on one domain controller. Is I look at SecPol. From a security standpoint, this tool is invaluable. So I go to a DC, I don't have to go to all of them, I go to one DC per domain and I run SecPol. Here's the power of SecPol. It tells you on that machine that you're running it on, because you cannot run it remotely, what the actual configuration is of that machine. I don't care if it came from the local setting, I don't care if it came from a GPO, I don't care where it came from. This tells you exactly what is configured on that machine. And since it's a DC, DCs are all getting the same GPOs. Hopefully you have them in the domain controller's OU. So you look at one. And what I'm looking for are add workstation to the domain. I'm going to guess most of you still have this configured. Why? It's there by default. By default, every user can create 10 computers by default. So go take this out, remove it. How many of your users do you want creating computer accounts? I'm thinking today, none, right? Now, why we're here, SecPol also gives me unbelievable information about the password policy. Yes, the password policy. I know it's the year 2025. I know the group that I'm in front of, but I'm going to say it anyway, just in case everyone isn't clear. You can have one password policy per domain using group policy. Okay? One. And where does that GPO need to be linked that has that password policy? At the domain node. Okay? Still today, I go to organizations and like, oh, no, we see this GPO right here, it's linked to this OU. I have the password policy in there configuring the users in the OU. No, you don't. It doesn't work that way. And I say, did you actually test it? Well, no. It's right there, right? Because it looks that way, right? I mean, if I go to group policy and I go to any, let's go down here. Let's say that I go to a GPO and I come in here and I go down to the password policy. It looks like I can configure another password policy. And if I link it to an OU, obviously the users in there are going to get it. But there's one thing that they're missing. What does the password policy apply to? What type of object? Right there. What type of object does the password policy apply to? Computer objects, right here. Computer configuration password policy. The password policy is not a user setting. It's not. It is a computer setting. This will never, ever hit a user in Active Directory, ever. So if you actually apply a GPO to an OU, what can it configure? If I have a computer in that OU, that computer has a local SAM, it'll control the local SAM of users on that computer. That's what it does, which is yet another check that I do. Because many times someone sets up a GPO, puts into an OU thinking it's to users, and then they put computers in there. And it actually modifies the local SAM, sometimes reducing security from what's actually being applied at the domain level. So I spot check workstations and servers to make sure that their password policy is matching at least what the domain has, because I don't want them to be weaker than what the domain is set to. And how do I spot check it? I go to that machine and I run secpol, because secpol is always 100% correct for what that machine is configured for. And from an assessment standpoint, what's great about this is I right-click and I export this. I just export the major areas, right? Also, the great thing about secpol is it gives me all of these amazing security configurations in one list. I export it and I have them all right there. So I know exactly if I'm using NTLM, if I'm supporting NTLM, not using, if I'm supporting NTLM, if I'm supporting LDAP signing, all of the great settings in here, I know exactly what they're set to by exporting this. I don't have to sift through a GPO. I go directly to a DC and I look at what the settings are. Now here's a trick. Some of you may know this. Can anyone tell me which settings in that list are actually being deployed using a GPO? The icon, okay? The bottom two, the two of the last three have a different icon. It's two computers with a little scroll. That represents a GPO from Active Directory. Now, it doesn't tell me which GPO. I can run RSOP to do that. But this is giving me a ton of information. And I utilize this to determine what the settings are in the environment. Okay. Now, I also look at user accounts that have never logged on, and if a password isn't required. Now, let's talk about each of those. Why do I look at accounts that have never logged on? If they've never logged on, who really cares, right? Well, let's think about how most environments, not everyone, still today in the year 2025, create users and the default password for that user. It's Friday. The admin gets a list of these are the 10 users, employees starting on Monday. They go in, they use either copy to or some other mechanism, and they put in the same password that they've used for the last 10 years. So that it's easy to transfer that. And they're thinking it doesn't really matter on Monday, they're going to change the password. But come Monday, only 9 people showed up. And that one didn't show up. Is it ever cleaned up? I mean, is the AD administrator ever told from HR that user never started? No. So you're going to have a ton of users that have never logged on. And who knows the password for those users?
Everybody.
Everyone, because it's the same password we've been using. Even if it's something like their birthday, well, the internet's full of that information. Password never, or password not required. I just did the PowerShell command for this on one of my customers Wednesday last week. Right? Users with Where's my password not required? Okay. Go run this, please. Over 8,000 users in their environment didn't require a password. Okay? The guy I'm working with, I just hired a guy, he was blown away. He's like, how in the world does this happen? You know how it normally happens? Your provisioning tool. Because your provisioning tool, for some stupid reason, takes that flag and it doesn't require a password. Now, does that mean it has a blank password? No. But let me tell you, this is a pretty good way for an attacker to get in the environment, set it to blank, and boom, they're ready to go. They don't even need a password to get in. Now, almost all of these settings also are looked at from Purple Knight. Not all of them, but most of them. So when I'm doing an assessment, I normally run Purple Knight because it gets me 80%, 85% of what I need. Then I supplement that with my PowerShell commands. Another one that I run is I get a list of services and the service accounts on every DC. Why every DC? Well, that information is not pushed out through group policy. And I want to know if someone has installed an application or service on a DC, and now they're using a service account for that. First of all, I don't want it running a service normally. And two, if it's using an AD account, now I want to go verify that that AD account, the service account, is configured properly. I don't want it to be able to change its password. I want to reduce its ability to log on everywhere, all of those checks. So I do cross-correlation of what I'm getting as well. Now, it's not a ding on Purple Knight that it doesn't do that. It's not really designed to do that. So that's why I supplement it. And I supplement quite a few commands using PowerShell to pull out information to add to what Purple Knight is providing. Okay? Just to give you an idea of some other ones that I've ran, I just created these last week. GPOs that do not have an entry on the ACL to apply the GPO. Because what two permissions do you need on GPO to apply it? Read and apply. So if I don't have anyone that has apply, what's the GPO doing? Nothing. It may be linked to 20 places, but it's doing nothing. Okay? I also pulled out, let's see, what else did I pull out? I pulled out unlinked GPOs. Those are pretty easy. And then I pulled out GPOs with everything disabled, right? Because you can go to a GPO and you can either disable the computer, you can disable the user, or both. But if I've disabled both, what is the GPO doing? Nothing. So I'm pulling out hygiene configurations as well. Because there's no reason to have a GPO there that's not doing anything. Right? What I suggest is, hey, let's run the report on the GPO and let's delete it. I can always recreate it if I have the report. So cleaning up the environment is also something that I go through. But I not only focus on on-prem AD, I also focus in Intra. And for Intra, I'm running Purple Knight. Purple Knight also gives you the ability to go into Intra, do the same similar analysis on the controls in Intra, and give you that report as well. I typically don't go beyond what Purple Knight is doing, but certainly you can add additional controls inside of Intra as well. And the two main things that I look at Intra, one, guest. you got to get rid of the guest account, please. Or at least control what the guest is by default. By default, the guest is the worst guest ever, right? It's like you invite someone over to your house as a guest, and they bring 10 other people. That's what the guest can do in Entra. If you allow the default configuration for guests to be there, that guest can now invite other people into your tenant. Okay? The other configuration that two more configurations I look at. I look at AD Connect or Entra ID Connect. And if possible, I want to get rid of this and go to Cloud Connect. Now, if you're a large enterprise, you typically can't do that. You're going to have limitations that you need to use the AD Connect. But please investigate Cloud Connect, because this is what the account that's doing the sync between on-prem and Entra can do. All of these things. It is the perfect attack vector. So when you look at tools like Bloodhound that are now today doing correlations not only with on-prem and Entra, they're doing it together. This is essential. This is usually the route that someone can take to go hop between one and the other. So look at these configurations as well. The other great thing is you can have Cloud Connect and the normal AD Connect together at the same time, so you can do testing. John Saville has amazing videos on this. So if you've never looked at John's YouTube channel, please go out and look at some of the stuff he's going over. He describes this in complete detail. It's like an 1.5 hour long video just talking about this configuration and the ins and outs of it. The third setting that I look at is conditional access policies. Now, first of all, I typically don't look at the details of the conditional access policies. I let Purple Knight do that for me, because it's going in and it's finding accounts that maybe don't have MFA, that don't have certain configurations. What I'm really looking for is an organization, normally an SMB, maybe a mid-sized organization, that didn't know that creating a single conditional access policy takes away all of the default security for that tenant. Because when you spin up a tenant, it has default security. And that default security is pretty awesome. But let's say that you're like, oh, I need to dabble with conditional access policy. So you go create one that just does something that you're testing. That one conditional access policy negates all of that other security, the default security. Yes?
Does that apply when it's report only?
Oh, if it's report only, of course not. Of course not. Of course not. Yeah. But as soon as you engage it, right? Let's say you engage it for a test user, for one simple little non-security thing, you wipe out all the other security, because you either have the default or you have conditional access policies. So I make sure that, first of all, if they're using the default or if they're using the conditional access policies, I want to rigorously investigate the results of those conditional access policies. I've asked Microsoft multiple times, hey, can you actually kind of give me an RSOP for this? It's a tough one, right? Because it's conditional. It's based on a condition, so it's more difficult to do that. So why are we doing assessments? Well, there's a lot of hidden things. Drift happens, right? Things just happen. And you look at settings like, how did that happen? I don't know, it just happened. Go secure it, right? You can't secure what you don't know. Pen tests are not enough. Any of you that do a pen test a year and go, we're good, that's not enough. A pen test is like hiring someone to secure your home and they only check the front door. They get in the front door, they didn't check any other door. A pen test is not complete and thorough, so you have to have assessments to do that. Your AD is probably not secure, most likely. Current tools are exceptional. Fill those gaps with PowerShell, and I also do GUI scrapes like I was showing you in SecPol. Okay? But please take the time to go through and look at your AD security. hopefully this kind of filled in some gaps, gave you some things to think about. I know we're kind of out of time, but we want to take one or two questions.
Yeah. Anyone have any questions for Derek?
So thanks for showing SecPol. Can't you achieve that same result using gpresult.exe, and even better with gpresult, assuming the firewall ports are open between the machine where you're running the command and your targets? Can't you access that same data remotely?
You are going to be missing the local settings.
gpresult doesn't pull in the local settings? I thought it did.
Because
I thought
I haven't used gpresult in a while.
It's one of my favorite tools.
Yeah, but you know Microsoft doesn't support it anymore. Yeah, RSOP, those tools, unfortunately, they've... God dang it.
They took away another one of my favorite tools?
No, they didn't take it away. No. They
just
didn't take away even RSOP. RSOP's still there.
Yeah, they're there.
I want...
Up this passage. Yeah, right there. Has to move up.
Yeah, I for some reason I'm using SecPol to give me the also the GUI environment to show me which one is domain or from the domain and not. I don't know, I have to go through it.
You do the HTML app, but it'll show you a nice report.
Yeah.
And tell you where it's coming from.
Yep. And just like in the GPMC, right? It's the same thing that's in the GPMC for the result.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the end of our conference.
Thank you.
Congratulations. You've all made it. Thank you, Derek.